So I'm actually taking some time off work, so I wanted to spend a little bit of extra time putting together a brand new video for all of you. I know normally I stick to upcoming board games launching every week, but this week I wanted to go over my entire collection and let you know exactly what I have and what I paid for it. And I know a lot of you have been anxiously waiting for a video like this. So let's just jump straight into it and go over the first item in my collection. And I'm going to be going through these by least expensive to most expensive, and I'll be giving you details of to exactly what I paid for each of these at the end of the video. So feel free to guess what each of these might cost, and you can even leave a comment down below. But if you're interested, I will have those exact numbers after we get through each of these. And the first item I have in my collection is Swiss made, but it's also my most affordable one, and it is the Tissot Gent XL. And this is my only quartz watch in my collection. And many watch collectors do turn their nose up at quartz movements, but I think it's really important that every watch collector has at least one quartz movement in their collection, because you're going to be using it all the time in order to set your other mechanical watches every time you decide to wear one that you haven't worn in a while. This one also does feature a flat sapphire glass, and if you're not familiar with sapphire, it's basically indestructible. The only thing that can scratch it is diamond, so there's no way that you're scratching up the glass on this watch. And this is a really great watch that I love wearing anytime I'm going camping or enjoying the outdoors. I think the beige dial and the olive green fabric really help give it that outdoor feel, but then the gunmetal stainless steel along with that sapphire glass I think just give it a really striking appearance. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. The dial here isn't anything special with its printed indices, but I do think the color palette really sells it on this one. And like I said, it's always good to have a quartz watch in the collection. And the next watch I have for you is probably the most bang for your buck that you'll ever find for a watch, and this is the Orient Bambino automatic. So this is an automatic watch, which means it is mechanical, but it's also self-winding. So it has a rotor in the back that's going to rotate as you wear it throughout the day. That's going to charge up the spring that is used to power the movement. And I'm sure many of you have probably never heard of the brand Orient, but it's actually a really well-established and respected brand. It's a sister brand of the Japanese brand known as Seiko, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And both Seiko and Orient are owned by the Epson company, which makes the Epson printers. So probably not what you expected, but each of these brands are independently run, and they each make their own in-house movements, which are both very well respected, very well done, and both amazing Japanese creations. This one also has a beautiful champagne sunburst dial with pressed on indices that are highly polished and looks really great as a dress watch, which this one is. And because of that, I don't really mind that this one doesn't have the sapphire glass. This one uses mineral glass, which is really easy to scratch, but also has a different look to it in the way that it reflects the light in this specific watch, since the glass is partially domed, is really spectacular when you get it in the right light. The mineral glass is also a lot less reflective, so it does make it look a little bit nicer in my opinion. And since it is a dress watch, you're not going to be doing anything too rigorous in this one, except maybe hitting up the dance floor at your best friend's wedding, so the risk of scratching it is pretty low. And what amazes me about getting this watch at this price point is that not only does it have a date window, but it also has a small seconds complication. And basically anytime you see complications on a mechanical watch, you're usually spending close to $1,000 or more. I will say that the leather strap that came with this one was very poorly designed and very poor quality, so if you do get this watch, I do recommend swapping out the strap. I did swap out my strap for a different leather strap, and even this one is really cheap, but it's still miles better than the one that came with the watch. But like I said, for the price point on this one, it's 100% worth it. And wearing this type of watch just makes me want to sit in front of a fire and just read a book in my favorite sweater during a winter day. And this next one is going to be a little bit controversial because this one is a mechanical watch but uses a Chinese movement. This is the Sugess Moonphase, and this one has a small frame date window as well as a minute timer complication and a moon phase. And you'll pretty much never find a moon phase on a watch like this unless you're spending, I don't know, $2,000 to $4,000. Unless of course it has a quartz or Chinese movement, both of which many watch collectors turn their nose up at. But I wanted a watch with a moon phase, and I don't care what anyone says, the dial on this one looks amazing. I am going to take the controversial stance and defend the movement on this one, because the movement of this watch was designed by the company Seiko, which is one of the most historic watch manufacturers in China. They've been around since 1955, and they actually created the watches for their troops in the military, so you know that they had to hold a high level of quality for those to last out in the field. And every watch collector knows that the Swiss-made watch movements are the most desirable, and a little known fact is that Seiko actually bought the rights to many Swiss movements from a Swiss watch company that was trying to raise some capital years and years ago. So even though this is Chinese made, many of their movements do use a Swiss design. I've had absolutely no issues with this watch, and I'm really impressed with its timekeeping. And I'm sure there is still a bit of a risk of quality control when you are buying a watch off of Alibaba. This one does also feature a sapphire glass and a exhibition back. And the nice thing about the exhibition back on this one is that this watch is decorated beautifully, even better than many of my more expensive watches. So if you're looking for a watch that's impressive while also having a bit of history, I definitely recommend checking out the Sugess line of watches. Many of them taken inspiration from other watches, but many of them also of their own design. No regrets on this watch here, and I think it's a good example of why you should never completely block out anything as a possibility based on blanket statements. But if you're willing to look and you're willing to do the research, there are some real gems out there. And speaking of gems out there, this one is from a micro brand. So this one is using a Miyota movement, and if you're not familiar with Miyota, they create watch movements for other brands to use in their watches. And this is using a Miyota 9039, which comes from their premium line of movements, and this one's known for being exceptionally thin. Of course, one of the reasons for that is that it doesn't have a date window or any complications, but for this one being a dive watch, it's not a huge issue. It does offer a screw down crown, which none of my watches have offered up to this point, flat sapphire glass, and an exhibition back, as well as a diamond-like carbon coating, and that's what's going to make this watch as black as it is. And it also makes it very durable because this diamond-like coating, just like it sounds, is very difficult to scratch. This one does also feature the Swiss BGW9 lume, which works exceptionally well. Having this one in the light, even for just a little bit, is going to have the lume in this glowing like the sun. I also love the fun little colors around the perimeter of the dial, as well as the purple sunburst texture. And the blue seconds hand on this one just ties it all together. I think this one just looks beautiful, and I just had to add it to my collection. The quality on this one is also amazing. All the hands just line up perfectly. I remember once when I looked at it, it was exactly 12 p.m. and it looked like one of the hands just disappeared because they're so perfectly aligned. And I've had issues with other watches before that were in a higher price point than this one. Of course, this one being a dive watch also does have a rotating bezel, and it offers very satisfying clicks with the 60 click bezel in one direction, which is what you want when you're diving because you don't want this rotating both directions and making you think that you have more air in your tank than you actually do. And next on the list, we have the beautiful, but maybe difficult to say, Hamilton Viewmatic Jazzmaster Auto. And if you're not familiar with the brand Hamilton, they are a very well-respected Swiss brand. And a fun fact here, they are also the creators of Elvis Presley's favorite watch. And I just fell in love with this one as soon as I saw it, and I did have to get this one used because this is the first watch I bought that was starting to get into a price range that I was getting a little uncomfortable paying. Not an expensive watch by any means, but I was just getting into watch collecting, and it's definitely not an inexpensive watch. This is another watch that fits into the dress category, but can also be worn day to day. The dial on this one just looks incredible with that textured center and then those polished pressed on indices. And of course it does offer a in-house movement unique to Hamilton. And I just absolutely love the bracelet on this one with the little H's holding it all together, which is a nice little touch. Plus it does have that butterfly clasp, which just makes putting this one on and off a breeze. This one also offers sapphire glass and an exhibition back, but a nice thing about this one is the sapphire glass is a little bit domed, and a little bit of dome on the glass is just a nice touch. And now we're getting to a watch that I had my eye on for quite a long time. I was just scouring the internet for deals because this one was starting to get more than I wanted to pay for a watch. And I actually thought that this one was going to be my second most expensive watch, but once I actually put them all out on paper, this one's actually my third most expensive watch. But this one also offers incredible value. This one is a Tissot PRX Powermatic 80, which is another Swiss brand which uses a modified movement to make this watch. So that means that they did purchase the rights to use a movement, but then they modified it just enough to make it their own. And one of those changes is that this uses a Navicron hairspring. And what that means is that this uses a very special titanium-based alloy that has anti-magnetic properties, which makes this really resilient to any magnetic interference, which can cause a lot of grief for any mechanical watch. It is an easy problem to fix, but it's always better to try and avoid it altogether. This one also does offer sapphire glass with an exhibition back, but what really makes this one shine is its integrated bracelet and that beautiful green dial. And this is a dial that kind of looks black in certain lights, but when you get it out in some brighter situations, it really starts to shine, and you get that sunburst look along with that textured back. And I just absolutely love the integrated bracelet on this one. You can get this one with non-metal bracelets, but I just can't give it up. It's part of the watch to me, and it takes the inspiration from the same model of watch, but from the 1970s. So this one is a refresh of a watch that they made years and years ago, and I think they just did a fantastic job. Even the bracelet just looks impressive. It uses brushed stainless steel, but then on the edge of each of the links it's actually polished, and that really allows it to just play with the light as you roll the wrist. This one does fit a little bit large, so if you do have a smaller wrist, might not be the one for you. Honestly, it's probably even a little big on my 7-inch wrist, but I don't care. I just love the watch and I'm happy to wear it. And now we have my second most expensive watch, and this is one that I haven't ever heard anyone else ever talk about. It's not a hugely famous watch, but it's just one that when I did find it, I just fell in love with it. It was super hard to find. And yes, this one is a Japanese-made watch, which is just as respected as your Swiss-made counterparts. And yes, this one is also from Seiko. And this one is the Seiko SBG 127 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games watch. And this watch is based on a watch that was designed for the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games. That original one was actually a chronograph with a bunch of different complications on it, and it was actually used to time many of the Olympic events. Absolutely love the way that this watch looks with its champagne sunburst dial, along with the different tapered steps within the dial, and then those beautifully polished indices. My only complaint with this one is that the bezel is friction fit, which isn't a huge issue considering it's not exactly a dive watch, but it does get hit out of place, and I would rather it just stay where I put it. And this is offered part of the Seiko Presage line of watches, which is just famous for making all sorts of very beautiful dials. My only issue with them is that most of them do not use a sapphire glass, but lucky enough for me, this one does, and that is one of the reasons why I ended up adding it to my collection. There are a few different variants of this model of watch, but this one is the only one that I was able to find that offered the sapphire glass, and it was a limited edition, so I just feel really fortunate to have been able to find this one at the price that I found it at, in the perfect quality that it is. And the final watch in my collection is of course my most expensive one, and it's the one I'm wearing on my wrist now. And this one is just a beautiful watch with possibly one of the most innovative movements that I've ever heard of. And this one is a Japanese movement, and I know you've heard of Seiko now, but there's something known as King Seiko, which is just one step above Seiko. And then there's something known as Grand Seiko, which is the top tier above all other brands of Seiko, and these are all independently run, I believe. But I prefer a Grand Seiko over a Rolex any day, which is the reason I have one in my collection. And this one I bought as a very special gift for myself. If you're not familiar with what I do for a living, I actually own and operate my own company with a few co-founders, and we still have a long way to go, and I wouldn't recommend starting your own company unless you're prepared for the amount of work and sacrifice that you need to make. But I'm just super impressed with how far we're able to take this company so far, and I'm really excited for the future that it holds. But there is a very special revenue milestone that we hit just this year, and because of that moment, I decided to go a little bit frivolous and spend quite a lot of money on a watch that I just had my eye on for so long, and I wasn't sure that I would ever actually buy it, but I found this one at a good enough price that if I absolutely needed the money, I could sell it for what I paid or more. But because of the meaning this one has for me, I really don't want to sell it because it's just something to celebrate a specific moment in my life that I worked really hard for. And this one is the Grand Seiko SBGA 415, otherwise known as the Taisetsu. And this one comes from the Grand Seiko line of watches known as the Heritage Collection, with each of them representing a different Japanese season. If you're not familiar with Japanese seasons, they have quite a few more than what we're used to here in North America. And this one represents the deep winter, and the dial is designed to represent the windswept snow in the Taisetsu Mountains. But there are a lot of special things about this watch. First of all, it does feature sapphire glass, but this one actually has a boxed sapphire glass, which is very, very difficult to manufacture. But it also protects the watch since it protrudes like that, and it also looks fantastic and really plays with the light. And as I said, I'd much rather bump the glass onto something rather than the watch because sapphire glass is near impossible to scratch. But even that is less of a concern with this watch because both the case and bracelet are made out of titanium, which is much more difficult to scratch than stainless steel. But then in addition to that beautiful dial, you have these beautifully polished indices and sharp edge polished hands. And this uses a technique known as Zaratsu polishing, which is impossible to be done by hand. You actually need a special tool in order to do this, because polishing something naturally rounds the edges, whereas this procedure makes sure that it maintains those sharp edges while still maintaining a very high sheen of polish. And this entire package is just wrapped up in a neat little bow with that Grand Seiko polished logo pressed on above the hands, and then the added contrast of that second hand, which is actually heat blued. But what really makes this watch special is the movement, because this is an innovative movement that you can only find in a Grand Seiko watch, and it's known as the spring drive. And the reason that this one is so interesting is because every mechanical watch you'll find out there uses something known as a balance wheel, and that's also known to have the heartbeat of the watch. And that's going to be oscillating back and forth, maintaining your watch movement and allowing your watch to move at a proper rate. But this watch was actually designed so much different that you can't even measure its accuracy using your traditional mechanical watch tools. You actually have to do something completely different. And the reason for that is that this one uses a spring drive, which is only found in Grand Seiko watches. And the way that this works in a nutshell is just like your traditional mechanical automatic watches. It's going to use a rotor to charge up a spring that's going to be generating the power to power the watch. But what the spring drive does on top of that is it also generates a small electrical current that it sends over to a quartz mineral. Everything in this watch is done in-house by Grand Seiko. Even the growing of that quartz mineral is done in-house. But this watch uses that quartz mineral basically as a bit of a throttle, because it's tied back to a magnet that's within this watch that is then used to control how quickly the spring in this watch uncoils, so that you're getting that high accuracy timing of a quartz watch, but then getting it in a mechanical movement. But something else that this offers that you just don't get in a quartz watch, and you also can't find in most mechanical watches, is a completely smooth sweeping seconds hand. Quartz movement watches are known for needing a battery and having those slow ticking hands with only 1 tick per second, whereas your mechanical movements are completely powered by a spring, no battery, but then can tick at a lot more beats per second. This one takes it to a whole new level with no ticks at all. It's completely perfectly sweeping because it's just a spring that's continually uncoiling, using a magnet to throttle that very spring that is generating the power in order to enable that throttling. And yes, there is no reason to buy a mechanical watch. They're pretty much obsolete at this point. Quartz is objectively the more accurate and least resource intensive way to make a watch. But the reason that people still love mechanical watches, and at least for myself, is that there is an art and an engineering there, and it's a craft where just every detail is attempted to be done in the best way possible. And there are watchmakers out there making watches that are hundreds and thousands times more expensive than any watch that I have in my collection. But they're also putting hours and hours of their life into those watches, hand manufacturing every single detail. There are many watches out there that have detail added to them that only the watchmaker will ever see, but they're still done. And the reason for that is a pride in their work and doing something as fantastic as possible just because they can. It's the same reason that we've climbed Mount Everest, went to the deepest depths of the ocean, and even landed on the moon. We did those things because they're there to be done, and the best thing about humankind is our ability to take on insurmountable challenges and succeed. And guess what? Each of those historic moments had a person wearing a watch that has now gone down in history. Buzz Aldrin notoriously wore his own personal Omega Speedmaster to the moon when the watch that NASA gave him happened to break, and then Rolex actually strapped one of their own watches to the outside of that submarine, or whatever you want to call it, that went down to the bottom of Mariana's Trench. Both of those watches survived. I'm not going to try and make it sound like the romanticism of mechanical watches always makes sense, but there is a charm there, and I truly do appreciate all the watchmakers out there that are just trying to make the best thing as possible, taking something simple and taking it to the extreme. That's all I have for you today, so as always, keep those wrists covered and those watches wound.